All right, everyone, this is Jimmy Kimmel. Happy New Year and welcome back to Future in View. I got to tell you, 2025 is already off to one hell of a start, and we're barely into December. I've been sitting here all week trying to process what I witnessed last Thursday, and honestly, I'm still shaking my head. What we're talking about today isn't just another political story. This is something that cuts right to the heart of how our government is supposed to work and who gets to make decisions that affect all of our lives. So before we dive into this thing, you know the drill. Hit that subscribe button. Not because I'm asking everyone else. This is specifically for you. When you subscribe to Future in View, you're telling me you want the straight story, no spin, no propaganda, just the facts and my honest take on what's happening. That means everything to me. So please, right now, one click. You're part of something real here. Now, here's what happened last Thursday that should have everyone paying attention. President Trump signed an executive order that, according to multiple news reports, aims to block states from regulating artificial intelligence companies. Let me say that again because it sounds almost too crazy to be true. The President of the United States signed an order trying to prevent individual states from making their own rules about AI technology. According to the White House's own website, this executive order is designed to create what Trump calls a single national framework for AI regulation. The order establishes something called an AI litigation task force within the Department of Justice, and according to the text of the order, this task force has one primary mission: to challenge state AI laws that conflict with the Trump administration's preferences. Now, you might be thinking, okay, that sounds like typical federal versus state politics, but here's where it gets really interesting, and this is the part that should make everyone sit up and take notice. During the signing ceremony in the Oval Office, according to multiple news reports, Trump said something pretty remarkable. He said, and I'm quoting from the coverage, "If they had to get 50 different approvals from 50 different states, you could forget it." Then he said this, and this is the part that really got my attention: "We have to be unified. China is unified because they have one vote. That's President Xi." He says, do it, and that's the end of that. Did you catch that? The President of the United States just said that America needs to be more like China because their system is more efficient, because one person makes all the decisions, because when President Xi says something, that's the end of that. Now, I want to be very careful here about how I talk about this because I think it's important to focus on what actually happened rather than speculating about motives. But according to the reporting I've seen, we have a president who looked at China's authoritarian system and said essentially, you know what, that looks pretty good. We should try that. And this isn't happening in a vacuum. According to news reports, this executive order comes after multiple failed attempts by Trump and Republican lawmakers to prevent states from regulating AI. Back in July, according to CNN's reporting, the Senate removed an AI moratorium from a major spending bill. In November, House Republicans tried to include AI preemption language in the defense spending bill, but that failed too. So when Congress wouldn't give Trump what he wanted, according to this story, he decided to go around them with an executive order. And when states wouldn't give him what he wanted, he decided to use the federal government to sue them into submission. But here's where this gets even more fascinating from a political standpoint. According to multiple news outlets, this executive order has created pushback from some unexpected places. Marjorie Taylor Greene, who has been one of Trump's most vocal supporters, reportedly wrote on social media that states must retain the right to regulate and make laws on AI and anything else for the benefit of their state. Think about that for a second. Marjorie Taylor Greene is breaking with Trump over states' rights. That should tell you something about how far outside normal Republican ideology this executive order really is. And it's not just Greene. According to reporting from various outlets, state lawmakers from across the political spectrum have warned against federal actions that would override state policies. They've pointed out that states have passed AI-related measures to protect consumers, guide government procurement, protect patients, and support artists and creators. These aren't radical liberal policies we're talking about. These are basic consumer protection measures that both Republican and Democratic state legislators have supported, and Trump wants to use the federal government to wipe them all out. Now, let me tell you about the context here, because this executive order didn't come out of nowhere. According to news reports, Trump has been under tremendous pressure from AI and tech companies who don't want to deal with what they call a patchwork of state regulations. These companies, according to the reporting, argue that having to comply with different rules in different states slows down innovation and hurts America's competitiveness with China. And you know what's interesting about this argument? It's the same argument we've heard from every industry that doesn't want to be regulated. The tobacco companies said state regulations were hurting competitiveness. The oil companies said environmental rules were killing innovation. The financial industry said consumer protection laws were slowing down business. It's always the same playbook. Claim that regulation hurts America's global standing, and therefore we need to eliminate it entirely. And we're not talking about small amounts of money here. According to various reports, the tech industry has spent millions of dollars on lobbying efforts to prevent state-level AI regulation. They've hired former government officials, funded think tanks, and organized sophisticated campaigns to influence both federal and state policymakers. The amount of resources these companies have put into fighting state regulations should tell you something about how much money is at stake here. And you know what? That's actually a legitimate policy debate. There are reasonable arguments on both sides about whether AI should be regulated primarily at the federal level or the state level. What's not reasonable, according to the legal experts I've been reading, is using an executive order to simply override state laws without going through Congress. Because here's the thing that a lot of people don't understand about how our government is supposed to work. The Constitution gives states certain powers and the federal government certain powers. When there's a conflict between them, typically Congress has to pass a law that explicitly preempts state authority. The president can't just decree that state laws don't apply anymore. This isn't just some technical legal distinction. This is fundamental to how our entire system of government operates. The founders specifically designed a system where power would be divided between different levels of government precisely to prevent any one person or institution from accumulating too much authority. When a president tries to bypass that system with executive orders, he's not just violating legal principles, he's attacking the foundational structure of American democracy. And according to multiple legal scholars quoted in news reports, that's exactly what this executive order is trying to do. Brad Carson, who runs Americans for Responsible Innovation, told news outlets that this order will hit a brick wall in the courts. Other legal experts have said similar things. The reason they're so confident is that there's actually a pretty clear historical precedent here. Throughout American history, when presidents have tried to use executive orders to override state authority without explicit congressional authorization, the courts have generally struck them down. The Supreme Court has repeatedly held that the Constitution's framework of federalism means states retain significant authority over their internal affairs, and that can't be swept away by presidential decree. But here's what I find really telling about this whole situation. According to the reporting I've seen, this isn't really about AI regulation at all. This is about power. This is about a president who doesn't want to deal with the messy, complicated process of democracy where different states get to make different decisions, where Congress has to debate and compromise, where you can't just say do it and have it happen. Trump literally said that China's system is better because President Xi can just make decisions without opposition. That's not American democracy. That's authoritarianism with a thin veneer of efficiency arguments. And let's talk about who benefits from this executive order, because that tells you a lot about what's really going on here. According to news reports, this order is being celebrated by tech companies and venture capital firms who don't want to deal with state-level oversight. Senator Ed Markey, a Democrat from Massachusetts, called it an early Christmas present for his CEO billionaire buddies. But it's being opposed by consumer protection groups, civil rights organizations, and state legislators from both parties who think their communities should have a say in how AI technology affects their residents. So we've got a situation where Trump is using federal power to override local democracy in order to benefit wealthy tech executives, and he's justifying it by saying we need to be more like communist China. Now, I want to step back and talk about the bigger picture here, because this executive order is part of a pattern that we've been seeing throughout Trump's second term. According to various news reports, he's been issuing executive orders that dramatically expand federal power at the expense of state and local authority. There was the order attempting to end birthright citizenship, which, according to legal experts, violates the 14th Amendment. There was the order targeting federal workers' civil service protection. protections. There was the order trying to control independent regulatory agencies that are supposed to be insulated from political pressure. And now there's this order trying to override state AI laws. In each case, according to the reporting, Trump is using executive power to try to achieve policy goals that he couldn't get through the normal legislative process. And in each case, according to legal scholars, he's pushing the boundaries of presidential authority far beyond what the Constitution allows. But here's what really gets me about this AI order specifically. It's not just an attack on federalism or states' rights, though it's definitely that. It's an attack on the idea that democracy should be messy and complicated and sometimes inefficient, because that's what democracy is. It's 50 states trying different approaches to difficult problems. It's Congress debating and compromising. It's courts checking executive power. It's local communities having a say in policies that affect them. Is it slower than having one person make all the decisions? Yes. Is it less efficient than the Chinese system? Probably. But it's also more responsive to what people actually want, more protective of individual rights, and less likely to make catastrophic mistakes. And when the president of the United States looks at that system and says, you know what, let's be more like China, that should scare the hell out of everyone, regardless of your political affiliation. Now, let's talk about what this means for AI specifically, because that's what this order is supposedly about. According to news reports, states have been passing various types of AI regulations. Some focus on preventing discrimination in hiring. Some focus on protecting children from harmful content. Some focus on ensuring transparency in government use of AI. These aren't all the same types of regulations. They're not all equally burdensome. Some might be good policy, some might be bad policy. That's exactly the kind of thing that should be debated and decided through the democratic process. But instead of engaging with that process, according to the reporting, Trump wants to use federal litigation to shut it all down. He wants to create what he calls one rule book for AI. And according to the executive order, that rule book will be written by his administration in consultation with the tech companies that don't want to be regulated. That's not democracy. That's corporate capture of government policy dressed up with efficiency arguments and scary talk about China. And here's the irony of the China comparison that Trump keeps making. According to news reports, China actually does have extensive AI regulations. They require AI companies to register with the government. They have rules about content moderation. They have restrictions on data collection and cross-border data transfer. So when Trump says we need to be unified like China, he's not talking about their actual regulatory approach. He's talking about their authoritarian decision-making process. He wants to be able to make policy without opposition, without debate, without input from people who might be affected by those decisions. But here's what I think is most important about this whole situation. According to the reporting I've seen, this executive order is likely to fail. Legal experts think it will be struck down by the courts. State attorneys general are preparing challenges. Even some Republican governors have expressed concern about federal overreach. So why did Trump sign it? According to political observers quoted in news outlets, it's partly about messaging. It's about showing tech executives that he's on their side. It's about positioning himself as the pro-business, anti-regulation candidate. It's about creating a contrast with Democrats who support more oversight of AI companies. But I think it's also about something deeper. According to his own words, it's about expressing frustration with the limitations of democratic governance. It's about wishing he could just say, do it, and have things happen the way President Xi can in China. And that frustration with democracy, that envy of authoritarianism, that's what should worry all of us about this executive order and others like it. Because democracy is supposed to be frustrating sometimes. It's supposed to be slow. It's supposed to be complicated. That's not a bug. It's a feature. That's what prevents any one person or group from accumulating too much power. And when we start thinking that efficiency is more important than accountability, when we start envying authoritarian systems because they can make decisions faster, that's when we start losing the things that make democracy worth defending. Now, I want to be clear about something. I'm not saying that every state AI regulation is good policy. I'm not saying that federal coordination on AI is necessarily bad. There are legitimate debates to be had about how to regulate emerging technologies in a federal system. What I am saying is that using executive orders to override state authority, justifying it by praising authoritarian systems, and doing it primarily to benefit wealthy tech executives, that's not the democratic way to resolve those debates. And according to the news reports I've been following, that's exactly what this executive order represents. So what happens next? Well, according to legal experts quoted in various outlets, this order will almost certainly face court challenges. State attorneys general will argue that it violates principles of federalism and exceeds presidential authority. Civil rights groups will argue that it undermines important consumer protections. And according to political observers, it will create tension within the Republican Party between those who support Trump's pro-business agenda and those who believe in traditional conservative principles like states' rights and limited federal power. But more broadly, according to the pattern we've been seeing, this executive order is part of a larger test of American democratic institutions. It's a test of whether the courts will check executive overreach. It's a test of whether Congress will assert its constitutional role. It's a test of whether state governments will defend their authority. And it's ultimately a test of whether ordinary citizens will pay attention to these kinds of power grabs and demand that their representatives defend democratic norms. Because here's the thing that sometimes gets lost in all the legal and constitutional analysis. These aren't just abstract questions about government structure. When states lose the ability to regulate AI companies, that affects real people in real communities who might face discrimination in hiring, invasive surveillance, or algorithmic bias in criminal justice decisions. And it's a test of whether the American people will accept the argument that democracy is too messy and slow, and we should be more like authoritarian countries where one person makes all the decisions. I think that's a test we can't afford to fail, because once you start down that road, once you start thinking that efficiency is more important than accountability, it's very hard to find your way back. The founders of this country didn't create a system of checks and balances and federalism because they thought it would be the most efficient way to govern. They created it because they understood that concentrated power is dangerous, no matter who holds it. And when the president of the United States looks at that system and says, you know what, let's be more like China, he's not just attacking AI regulation or states' rights. He's attacking the fundamental principles that make American democracy work. According to the news reports I've been following, a lot of people are starting to understand that. State officials from both parties are pushing back. Legal experts are warning about constitutional violations. Even some of Trump's own supporters are expressing concern about federal overreach. That gives me hope, because it suggests that American democratic institutions, while strained, are still capable of defending themselves. It suggests that there are still limits on presidential power, even if those limits are being tested. But it also suggests that we need to pay attention to what's happening. We need to understand that this isn't just about AI regulation or tech policy. This is about what kind of country we want to be. Do we want to be a country where states can experiment with different approaches to difficult problems, where Congress debates and compromises on important issues, where courts check executive power, where local communities have a say in policies that affect them? Or do we want to be a country where one person can override all of that by signing an executive order and saying we need to be unified like China? According to everything I've read about American history and constitutional principles, that's not a hard choice. But according to what's happening right now, it's a choice we're being forced to make. And the decisions we make in the next few months, as this executive order works its way through the courts, as Congress decides whether to assert its authority, as states decide whether to defend their rights, those decisions will shape American democracy for years to come. So pay attention to this story. Don't let it get lost in the noise of daily politics. Don't assume that someone else will defend democratic institutions while you focus on other things. And here's why this matters to you personally, regardless of whether you care about AI regulation. Today, it's artificial intelligence. Tomorrow, it could be environmental regulations that protect your local water supply. Next week, it could be consumer protection laws that prevent companies from ripping you off. If we establish the principle that a president can override state laws whenever tech executives complain about compliance costs, there's no limit to where that logic leads. Because according to everything we're seeing, those institutions are only as strong as the people who are willing to stand up for them. And right now, they need all the support they can get. Thanks for being here with me. Thanks for caring about these issues. Thanks for understanding that democracy requires active participation from all of us, not just the people who hold office. That's what Future in View is all about. Keeping track of the stories that matter, even when they're complicated, even when they're not the most exciting thing happening, even when they require us to think about uncomfortable questions about power and authority and the future of our country. I'll be back soon with more episodes. Keep watching, keep thinking, keep demanding that your representatives respect the constitutional limits on their power. That's all we can do, and that's everything we need to do. Take care, my friend. Stay informed, stay engaged, and remember that democracy is worth defending, even when it's messy and complicated and sometimes frustrating, because the alternative, as Trump himself has made clear, is being unified like China. And that's not America. That's not who we are. And that's not who we should ever become.